Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive Perspective. Lebanese resistance is ongoing on a level which in some ways hasn't been seen before. Unprecedented destruction of Israel's occupation forces is literally taking place as we speak. With me is Laith Marouf. Who better than Laith to update us on what exactly is happening? It's also, of course, been the 26th anniversary of the Lebanese resistance's defeat of the occupation by Israel. They've suffered losses every time they've tried to do this, but lately they don't seem to learn the lesson. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm glad I'm back with you. Definitely the Israelis don't learn a lesson, and this is because of how ingrained supremacy is in their heads. You know, when you think you are a chosen people and that you have a God-given right to genocide, occupy, and loot, reality shocks you when you see how you're unable to defeat Hamas in an extermination camp that is besieged for 15 years, or unable to defeat Hezbollah or Iran. Then they resort to genocidal mass casualty events, as we saw in Gaza, to kind of fulfill their feelings of supremacy once they are defeated on the battlefield. And this is what's happening here in Lebanon. They are, the reality on the ground is clashing with that supremacist ideal in the head of these colonists, and they are unable to come to rational decisions because of that reality. If there was rational leadership that is not engulfed in supremacist ideals, they would have withdrawn a long time ago. They would have ceased to commit genocide, but they are stuck in this reality. And as we see, Hezbollah is achieving huge military victories on the ground, hunting the occupation forces as they advance with those FPVs. And we've seen, all of us, those videos of those quadcopters chasing Israeli soldiers and armored vehicles in occupied parts of Lebanon. And now we're seeing those FPVs chasing Israeli officers inside the north of occupied Palestine and hunting them and assassinating them and hitting Israeli bases and vehicles and colonies all around the north. So whatever justification that the Zionists were putting forward to their own colonists, saying that they need to occupy the south of Lebanon to create a buffer zone to protect the north of occupied Palestine, well, that's all crashing at the fall of the Hezbollah's drones and missiles on the locations inside occupied Palestine, even though that the Israelis are pushing further and further in the south.
It's extraordinary that arguably one of the most powerfully equipped militaries at the end of the day can't seem to handle, let alone the Lebanese resistance, which in itself is not a full standing army. It has no air force, it has no real air power now, other than, of course, the missiles that they've acquired, and of course now this new drone technology, which shows, I think, their industrious, innovative capacity in the resistance. But they've not even been able to do anything to the Gazan resistance in the way that they wanted, i.e. complete annihilation. But here in Lebanon, of course, Lebanon has shown the way towards defeating this kind of imperialist juggernaut. And it's now really a question of, where do the Israelis go if this continues, if they suffer the losses they have? And you've also pointed out on George Galloway's show, I noticed that you pointed out that over 70,000 soldiers have gone AWOL, Israeli soldiers. Tell us a little bit about the morale of the Israeli army and what they could do now.
Yes. You mentioned now twice the 26 years anniversary of the liberation of Lebanon in the year 2000. And of course, at that time, the Israelis had crushed the Palestinian Liberation Organization in 1982 and entered Lebanon, entered Beirut, reached Beirut, and occupied the second Arabic capital after Jerusalem in 1982. But within days of that occupation in 1982 and the Sabra and Shatila massacre, there was already armed resistance. Even with the vacuum that was left with the exit of the Palestinian Liberation Organization from Lebanon, and within less than 3 weeks of the occupation of Beirut, the Israelis were pushed out of the city. And that began their withdrawal under fire stage by stage until we reached the year 2000. So you can imagine how the world was so different then. There was the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the the communist socialist camp in the world. There was a unipolar superpower that has just destroyed Yugoslavia, Iraq, Somalia, all before the defeat of the Zionists in the year 2000 at the hands of Hezbollah. So under those really unfavorable conditions for resistance, Hezbollah managed to defeat Israel and make it run out of the country with its tail behind between its legs. So now we're living in a different era where the axis of resistance has brought in huge innovations technologically in the military, technologies side. We saw how Iran became the number one global power in drone production and drone technologies and/or missile technologies, and we've seen how Hezbollah has been using these same technologies that are also homogeneously built here in Lebanon, similarly what Ansarullah in Yemen was doing. So the world has changed. And there is no hope under these conditions for Israel to actually defeat Hezbollah. Similarly, where the United States has no hope of defeating Iran, save for a nuclear holocaust that engulfs all of humanity, right? And so how can these colonists in Palestine dream that they can achieve something they couldn't achieve in the 1980s and 90s in comparison to today? And the achievements of Hezbollah, as you mentioned, there's at least 70,000 Israeli soldiers that are abandoned their duties and ran away from the whole country. They're not even inside the colony itself. And the shortages of materials that Israel is facing, whether it's the raw materials deliveries because of the war in Iran, and so, for instance, raw iron being delivered to Israel to build those, metal sidings on their tanks, the Merkavas, or the deliveries of parts of the Merkavas. The vast majority of the Merkava is built in other NATO countries and it's just assembled. So when we're talking about military hardware, the Israelis are suffering hugely. At least 400 tanks destroyed in South Lebanon since the beginning of this phase of the war. And they're unable to rebuild that stockpile because of the shortages globally. Same thing with their air defenses. We saw every day almost Hezbollah releasing videos of the FPVs hitting the Iron Dome batteries. Those are not easy to replace. Maybe you can manufacture more missiles, but the batteries themselves, with the shortages of raw materials, is hard. And with Iran hitting many of these factories during its phase of the war, the Israelis are facing shortages in equipment, shortages in men, and they are clashing with this reality. They don't want to believe it. They're lying to themselves and pushing forward, and their only response militarily that they can see is to commit mass casualty events. I don't know if you can hear it, but there's a drone flying very low right now over Beirut. The Israelis just announced that they will be bombarding the southern suburb. This will be the first time that they do since the end of the or the ceasefire between Iran and the United States. They ordered huge evacuations in the south of Lebanon. north of the Litani. So now they've included the zone between the Litani and the Zahrani River, which reaches Sidon. So we're talking about another million, almost Lebanese people that are being now forcibly displaced, ethnically cleansed, given the choice between ethnic cleansing or genocide at the hands of these discriminating bombs. So this is the only answer that the Israelis have to their military defeat, is mass casualty events, genocidal actions, and that doesn't change anything in the will of the people. In Lebanon, we've lived many, many genocides and massacres at the hands of the Israelis since 1942. In fact, even before the foundation of the Jewish colony in Palestine. And the people here, as the people in Palestine, have yet to submit to the will of the Zionists, and we will not.
Well, we know that this mass murder business is something they're very used to. There isn't one massacre that's happened. You mentioned Sabra and Shatila, which was an awful, shocking case in and of itself. But the Dahiya doctrine is there. It allows them to, willfully carpet bomb civilian residential areas. And they've normalized this now. I want to bring in the United States and broaden the significance of Lebanon, because it's not just about Lebanon. The resistance of Lebanon, of course, primarily is a right that they exercise for the sovereignty of their nation, and that's absolutely, unarguable. It's their inarguable right. But in some ways, I look at the resistance in Lebanon as being the front line for defending the whole world, because Greater Israel is certainly still on the menu from the Israeli point of view, whether that's delusional or not. Smotrich and Ben-Gvir have said that they want to occupy more and more territory, not only in Lebanon, but also the Samara Judea concept in Palestine is on their agenda. Syria is more or less in their control or in their hands anyway, directly or indirectly. So they're still pushing for this kind of crazy Jewish supremacist, I know that's how you term it, Jewish supremacist dream of occupying vast swathes of West Asia. And the US is part and parcel of that, because the US, in Congress or around those circles, we're now having the idea mooted that the US and the Israeli armed forces should merge. Is that because the Israelis simply can't handle this and can't exercise this Greater Israel concept on their own?
Yes. Obviously, they lost against the besieged resistance in Gaza. 3 years almost right now that they are trying to defeat the Palestinian resistance in this extermination camp that is besieged for 15 years. I don't think that we can find any historical equivalent to that. Right, like the siege of Leningrad was two, national armies fighting each other, and it didn't last this long. We're talking about a population that has rudimentary weapons that is able to repel this onslaught by some of the most well-armed armies that we've seen, and with a never-ending supply of weapons and political and economic support from the imperial core. So, if Israel cannot defeat Hamas in 3 years, it cannot defeat anybody. And if there is even 1 day of delays of deliveries of political, economic, and military support from the imperial core, this colony will collapse, will cease to exist. All right. So what we're seeing is that given that there's this discrepancy between their dreams, their delusions, and the reality on the ground, they are maybe, kind of rushing to find a solution by making Israel officially the 51st state. Okay, this is what it would mean if the Israeli military and the American military are combined. But what is that going to change? That's going to be just pictorial change. The reality is the United States and its military-industrial complex have been integrated with Israel a long time ago. The United States has conducted all these wars in the Arabic and Muslim world over the last 33 decades at least, were all to maintain the existence of this Jewish colony. Every Arabic and Muslim state that had any sovereign position or anti-Zionist position or a military-industrial complex that was becoming sovereign, they were crushed, all to maintain this Jewish colony. And none of that has guaranteed the continuity of this colony. And in fact, we are right now at the closest point of its end. And with it, the whole imperial order that has hinged its supremacy as the sole hegemon, this empire governed from the United States, has hinged its hegemonic position on the existence of this Jewish colony. You see, like the United States could have continued looting Arabic and Muslim resources, as they are doing in Iraq, for instance, still, looting the gas and oil and much of the Arabian Peninsula, by getting rid of the Jewish colony and installing another puppet in Palestine. And nothing would have changed. The U.S. would have continued to control the trade routes and the resources of the region. But they are saying, no, we don't want another vassal in Palestine. We want a Jewish colony, and we want to kill you all, Arabs and Muslims, and we want to stay the hegemon. Those things don't work together. And the elite in the West are risking all their imperial might to maintain this puny colony that shouldn't exist.
Well, even more internationally, Iran has absolutely tied Lebanon's liberation and its freedom and its sovereignty to its own, because essentially any negotiation that Donald Trump is doing with the Iranians, it seems that they are adamant that it must include the end of attacks on Lebanon. Now, in the last round of negotiations, what did manage to get secured was that the bombing in Beirut, the carpet bombing of Beirut, was prevented. It didn't prevent the Israelis continuing to violate that ceasefire on the basis of attacking South Lebanon, but it seems that Iran is okay with the power of the Lebanese resistance to handle itself. And it seems, in retrospect, that that's absolutely true, given where the Israelis are now in terms of the body bags, which are going back to Tel Aviv and Haifa and wherever. I'm curious about the role of Lebanon in this international situation, which then makes it absolutely vital for people in the West and in Europe, etc., to and beyond, to recognize Lebanon's right to independence and to support it, because that's in the interests of the world, given that Iran is not going to ease up on the Hormuz Strait or come to any deal unless Israel stops trying to overrun Lebanon.
Yeah, the ceasefire between the United States and Iran, when it started, Iran said that it included Lebanon and all of the region, meaning including Gaza and Yemen and all of that. The United States agreed, saying yes, and then we saw the Israelis continue bombarding Beirut and South Lebanon, and that's when the Americans claimed that Lebanon is not included in the ceasefire, and they also told the Iranians that this is separate. The war between the U.S. and Iran is separate. The U.S. is not intervening in the war against Lebanon and Hezbollah, and the Israelis and Hezbollah can fight it off by themselves. And that's when Iran said, well, then I can continue bombarding Israel, because that's separate from the war between the U.S. and Iran. Right. And that is when Trump forced the Israelis to stop bombarding Beirut. And as you mentioned, the axis of resistance led by Iran is confident 100% that Hezbollah can defeat the invasion of Lebanon in the south, as long as there is no mass casualty events of targeting civilians in the capital. And that was like kind of a tacit agreement between the US and Iran that they'll let Hezbollah and Israel fight it off in the south of Lebanon, and the winner takes all. And as we see, the Israelis right now are breaking that. They're threatening to bombard southern suburb of Beirut, Wadahi. And we just heard a statement from the Foreign Affairs of Iran saying that they will come to the aid of Hezbollah if the Israelis commit such an act. So in any minute now, once the Israelis attack the Dahi, we will be seeing Iran firing missiles on the Zionist colony. And that's what the Israelis want. They want that to happen in order to the US to come and say, I'm coming for the defense of Israel, and triggers a wider regional war once more. And this is, of course, in counter to the interests of the United States. This is counter to the leadership, the tactical and strategic leaders in the military of the United States, who all have gamed this multiple times, and can see that they're going to lose any war with Iran, and actually lose more of their influence globally and their respect globally for that. So this is the moment we're living right now. Israel is losing on the ground in South Lebanon. Therefore, it's going to trigger a mass casualty event in Beirut or somewhere else in Lebanon, with that threats to destroy the dam over the Qaraon lake, meaning that would have a huge flood across all the Orontes River in the Beqa Valley, all the way to Homs and Hama inside Syria. All of that will be flooded, and thousands of people will be either martyred and or homeless, their homes destroyed. And that's not going to be allowed to happen by Iran without a punishment for this. And that will bring us back to square number one in terms of full confrontation between the United States and Iran.
Yeah, it seems a very dastardly scheme on the part of Netanyahu and the Israelis to try and get that war going on. They seem to be desperate for a world war. I mean, it really is. It beggars belief that the world can sit by and just let Netanyahu play these games. Trump has got himself in a web of his own making, and of the making of those he's listened to. The Israel lobby, whether you want to call it the money mafia, the Zio-Jewish money mafia in the background, the Zionist Christian lobbies. There's quite a lot of forces which have managed to pin Trump, but he himself isn't blameless. I think he's always been part of that network anyway. So when people try to put the blame on others and vindicate Trump, that I don't buy that, Laith, to be honest. It's a system. It's a systematic desire to impose this hegemony. There is one other factor that I'd like to get your thoughts on. I mean, I rarely bring it up in conversations in news type programs, because news wants to focus on reactions and actions and not theories. But, at the same time as creating this war, who benefits from it? Or other than, the Americans aren't going to benefit from this. The American economy doesn't benefit, as far as I can see. Trump doesn't benefit in his elections. The rest of the world certainly doesn't benefit with the Hormuz being shut down. And of course, I've got to add that Lebanon is also a crucial choke point. If the Lebanese forces, which I believe have cruise missiles as well, started to hit shipping in the Mediterranean, they could shut down Israel's ports if they really wanted, rather like Israel did with the Beirut port when they blew up the entire port. So there's this other looming war which could take place on the seas, and yet Trump, the world, etc., doesn't seem to be that interested in muzzling Israel, this tiny little piece of land which they've robbed from the Palestinians, and are now causing mayhem all over the world. How do we muzzle this entity?
The biggest ill that is facing the political spheres in the West is this multinational capital that is moving between economies, that has no patriotic loyalty to anyone. Right. And so when we think about Trump or the whole political class that is now governing in the UK, in the US, or Western countries in general, and we look at their actions, how they are counter their national interests, we see that two layers of one being Zionism and Jewish supremacy, because a big part of that multinational capitalist class is Jewish and Israeli, and then you have that other part that is not Jewish or Israeli, but also has adopted this idea that they are, and their money is transnational, is not beholden by any identity or state and its borders. So look at Peter Thal, how he just moved to Argentina with all his money and so forth. So right. Trump and his cabal that is around him is of the same sense. They don't care really if the United States survives as an empire and as a power, as long as their money survives, okay, and can be moved around and they can find another base for power. And this is actually where the Israelis are able to talk about a greater Israel. Because when you think about it, a greater Israel or an Israeli empire, a Jewish empire that controls the Arabic peoples and Western Asia and North Africa, that is a threat to American imperialism. The United States currently controls all these oil and gas fields and the trade routes. Having a competitor, an Israeli empire controlling those, means the United States loses influence and loses control of the financial power of the oil and gas. So how can an ambassador of the United States, Mike Huckabee, is ambassador to Tel Aviv, come out publicly and say Israel has the right to a greater Israel from the river, from the Euphrates to the Nile, and from Mecca to the Taurus Mountains, if he's actually a national, patriot? He isn't, right? And so what we see is that this multinational capital class is willing to jump from one empire to another, from one state to another. They're willing to burn down the United States and become citizens of the Jewish empire, right? They're willing to take their money and buy out Argentina's Patagonia region, ethnically cleanse it of the Mapuche people, and build a mini Israel there. Or they're willing to burn down all of Ukraine and bring the Nazis into power, all to create a Israel on the Black Sea, as Zelensky talked about, who is also a Jewish supremacist, allied with the Nazis. So that's the true reality of what's happening within the elite structures in the West, and why it's so shocking for all of us, these decisions that are being taken by these elites.
Well, just to add to your point about this kind of Israeli flight, they've also started occupying Cyprus and Albania. Albania only came across this week, but they're buying up vast amounts of property, land, and it's with the complicity of those governments. And you mentioned Argentina. So they're also partly aware of the fact that their stay in Palestine is untenable. I mean, that's surely the case. Otherwise, why would they be starting to buy up property in all these places? They've got a get-out plan.
Yes, and look at the demonstration that just happened in New York. 1 million Jews out supporting for Israel march with Smotrich, the Minister of Security in the colony, being there, and the highest authority within the Democratic Party, Schumer, being there, the head of the police of New York, and so forth. I mean, what is this? All these things tell us. They tell us that these Jewish supremacists they are of the view that they already control much of the West, right? If they can go into Greece and buy out whole islands, okay, or buy out whole villages and turn them into Jewish-only, closed-up, gated communities in Greece, in Cyprus, in Albania, in Argentina, in the United States itself. If they can do all of that while there's a supposed Muslim mayor, Mamdani, okay, Why would they not flaunt this power, right? And if the elite in the West are so neutered, so engulfed themselves in believing in Jewish supremacy, right? And that, they need to work to support this Jewish supremacy. Why would we be surprised that this elite, like the prime ministers and presidents of Greece, Cyprus, Albania, Argentina, wouldn't sell their own people and their own land and crash their own countries in the service of these Jewish supremacists? So, if when Palestine will be liberated, and it will be liberated, this will not be the end of Jewish supremacy or Zionism. Okay, actually, people in Greece, in Cyprus, in Albania, and Argentina will suffer as much as we suffered here in this region. And unfortunate for them, the populations of these countries, their elites will not be resisting, and they cannot birth. Up until now, it seems like they haven't been able to birth resistance movements to the process that we're discussing, the takeover of their countries. Are they going to be able to resist for 100 years like we did here and sacrifice the sacrifices we gave? I'm not sure about that. I almost would say Cyprus is a write-off as a country because it only has 2 million citizens, and they're impoverished, and much of their land, agricultural and tourist locations have been already sold to the Israelis. So it's like I look at what's going to happen to these countries in the next decades, and I predict that they will become enslaved.
Amazing prediction there. I can't disagree with you, but there are green shoots of resistance in these areas. Thomas Massie comes to mind in the US. You must have followed the whole situation there. That's a classic case of just how much political, financial, and media power the Zionists have in America. But there's also Dan Bilzerian who's standing for Congress. So there are a couple of really powerful voices which are rocking the cradle over there in the States. What do you make of all of that?
The case of Thomas Massie revealed two things for us. One is, everybody was concentrated on the Epstein files and this pedophilia and cannibalism and sex trafficking ring as supposedly the only reason that the elite in the West, political elite who participated in this, are being pro-Israeli and pro-genocide. Well, Thomas Massie had no Epstein files. Is a married man who knows God, who has dignity, and doesn't participate in these perversions. And so he still lost. How did he still lose?
Yeah.
This moment showed us that actually, up until now, all this theatrical democracy and elections that have been managed by the elite to have a red team and a blue team that switches every time the population gets angry, you switch to the other team. That was managed by all these media empires that played team sides and so forth, and made the population think that there is actual debate within the elite and so forth. That is all over right now. What we saw the Zionists do is outright steal an election, tell you your vote doesn't count, we're going to stuff the ballot with double the number of votes that ever voted in this primary. It's something that is illogical to happen. You may have a big jump somewhere in an election, but it's never double the votes.
Yes.
Okay? And we're going to rub it in your face. Okay? The Zionists have stolen the election, have finally revealed that there was never a democracy. There was never an election. There was only an illusion and a theatrics of it. And now they have abandoned the theatrics of it. Okay? Is Dan Bilzerian gonna fare better? I'm not sure. I hope he wins. But I don't think there is a democracy. And I think, he doesn't have a seat there. He's not even a congressman. That Thomas Massie was a congressman with a national platform, with being interviewed on daily on national media, and still they stole the election from him. Will Dan Balizian do better? I wish him the best, but I don't think so. So what we're seeing is that the Western elite with the Zionists are crashing the theatrical election process, quote unquote, democracy.
Right.
They're demolishing it, actually, like they're blowing it up there, like they blow hospitals in Gaza. And they're telling the viewer, no, there's democracy, go and vote. So the audience, the voters in the United States, the citizens right now, already only 20% of the population or maybe 25% votes. Well, I predict that's going to keep on going down, the number, because nobody believes that there is democracy anymore. These are some of the many indicators of beginnings of the collapse of the system as a whole in the West. I think we will be soon starting to see more militancy come out in the West. That whole wave of Palestine action that we saw, which we can consider almost the most militant actions that have been in Western societies since the collapse of the Soviet Union. I think those are going to be just the beginnings of what's going to come. If there is actual patriots in the United States, they have their constitutional right to carry arms and form militias. And I think we will see that happening sooner than we think.
Wow. Well, Donald Trump has gone on record saying he's not worried about the midterms. Benjamin Netanyahu, who is a known criminal, but has got all his crimes, etc., pending in terms of court actions. He's got an election coming up as well. These body bags are returning for Israel. You talk about this kind of oligarchy, which actually doesn't care about the democracies, whether it's the fake democracy in Israel or the fake democracy in America or beyond. It seems as though they can fiddle these elections and the results, and they can make them do whatever they want. They could even collapse neoliberalism and adopt fascism, because they are also nurturing, along with the Zionists, every fascist movement in Europe that I know of, and certainly in America, of course, they're pushing for that as well. So maybe that's the direction. They're just fed up of the pretense of having a democracy, too hard to manage, go back to default fascism, and that's the future for what is now the remote-controlled neoliberal West. But bringing it back to Lebanon and the resistance, all of this has been achieved, all of this rumbling around the world has happened because of the axis of resistance, because of the Lebanese resistance, because of the Iranian resistance, the Yemeni resistance, and that in Iraq. They are the front line, and one has to call a spade a spade. At the end of the day, that's where the main front line of this war is. How do you see that panning out, as my final question, over the next year or so?
Yeah, definitely the steadfast resistance of all the people in the region, from Palestine to Iran and Yemen and everything in between, has enlightened the world, have revealed what's behind the curtain, from international law to human rights to United Nations. All of those theatrics collapsed. And one by one, actually, were abandoned as a battlefield by the imperial powers. So, this idea of international law and the International Criminal Court, or International Court of Justice, and so forth, were demolished slowly as they lost the debate and the plot. So, anytime we're seeing all those old battlefields that the West dominated getting defeated in the West, they are abandoning them and demolishing them. So we went through all of that structures of international law and international relations that were built after the Nazi Germany, World War II, gone. Now we are going through the internal structures that and theatrics. We saw first, of course, the freedom of speech being stripped of most of the Western populace and control of social media. We saw the beginnings of prosecution and persecution of anyone that had, went against the genocide. And we see right now the collapse of the judicial system in countries like the UK, where with those secret trials against Palestine Action and so forth. So the whole common law structure, the elite in the UK are demolishing the judicial system in front of their eyes of the citizens in order to save the Jewish colony. And, similarly, when we're talking about the electoral process, we saw, of course, over the last decade how the Labour Party in the UK committed suicide in order to make sure Corbyn wasn't the prime minister, right? So here's a political party committing suicide on purpose at the behest of the Zionists to make sure their own leader doesn't lead the country because he is critical of the genocide in Palestine. Similarly, right now, we will see that happening all across Europe. And we are seeing it already. And, the rise of reform, both the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party right now are purposefully committing suicide to make sure, let's say, the Green Party doesn't win, even if we still believe in actual elections.
Yes.
And at least to make it look like when the Conservatives are made to win, that it was a fair election, because the Labour and Conservatives did so bad, and the audience is not happy with them, or the citizens are not happy with them, and that's why it's logical that the reform wins. Of course, it's not logical. The vast majority of British people are aware, are human, like all of us. There's no population that is just genocidal for the sake of it. So I think the rise of the fascist extreme right in the West is systemic, methodological. The elite and the media of the West are all participating in fabricating this rise. And it's the same elite anyways, no matter what party that is offered on the ticket.
Well, Laith, thank you very much for a really comprehensive journey. These things have to be done in this way because joining the dots is very rarely done on mainstream media. And we started with Lebanon and the resistance and the defeat of the IDF on the ground in South Lebanon. And we've ended up talking about politics in Britain and America. That's the way of the reality. And I'd say to the audience, really, that the power is in the hands of the people. It's in your powers to reject not only the parties and the leadership, but the system itself. Maybe it's time we started thinking about alternative systems rather than alternative parties if we want people to come into power that aren't going to destroy our economies by fighting wars that have got nothing to do with us, if that we elect leaders who actually have virtue ethics and principles that we hold them to account to, if we have a parliament which isn't linked to the City of London, for instance, or an American presidency which isn't dictated to by Zionist money mafias in Wall Street and beyond, well, that is a dream. That is a world that we would all probably want. 80-90% of people that I talk to who've got any sense would want a world like that. Instead, we've got warmongers, we've got money mafias, we've got people raping other societies, pillaging and plundering the likes of Lebanon, pillaging and plundering the likes of Iran and across West Asia. Is that what we want? And what are the ways that we want to implement to change it? Revolution is something which is not a word that is on the lips of the average working class or the ordinary person in the West, because we're fat on dollars and pounds and thousands of other false deities which we've been served up by the neoliberal system. But are we in for a rude awakening? Because if they continue down the line that Laith has outlined in West Asia, then the reality is already about to come and kick home, i.e., our pockets are going to be hit. And if that doesn't wake up people, if that doesn't make you realize that actually they're making us all go to war for no reason, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it's in Lebanon, whether it's in Iran or against Yemen, and if you don't recognize that as the fundamental problem of our leaders, i.e., they are destroying our economies, destroying our welfare on the back of their own vicious, rapacious desire for power and control and for plunder, then I'm not sure what will wake us up. But Laith's done his best to give you the reality. Thank you so much, Laith Marouf. Don't forget to check out Free Palestine TV, where he is regularly on the front line, risking his life. That drone that was flying above his head right now is a reality. That's a reality which we have dictated. At any moment, these people on the front line can be murdered, can be assassinated. Medical teams in Lebanon are picked off deliberately by Israel. And it sickens me that these people are, those who will be the front line of trying to save injured souls that are dying. And yet now they're being targeted. They were in Palestine. It's being done in Lebanon on a daily basis. If that doesn't stir you, if all else that we've said in this show doesn't stir you into action and coming onto the street and trying to change your systems, then I'm afraid I'll just have to try harder and maybe wake you up and get Laith to come again and wake you up next week again. Thank you for watching this edition of Deep Dive Perspective. Thank you, Laith Marouf. See you again soon.
Thank you very much for having me. See you, inshallah, soon.
Take care.